The lobby is bright with morning light. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, real plants in tall glass planters. Everything in this building was chosen deliberately, years ago, by someone who understood exactly what luxury was supposed to mean. Black revolving door begins to turn. A single figure steps through. Navy coat, canvas tote bag, flat shoes on marble that costs more per square foot than most people make in a week. She walks without hurry, without introduction. Behind the front desk, 3 sets of eyes lift at once, and the temperature of the room changes before a single word is spoken. A ponytailed woman's hand drifts under the counter toward a button no guest is ever supposed to see. A young man crosses his arms. And the man in the middle, the manager, 9 years behind that desk, tilts his head with the slow, practiced calculation of someone who has already decided. She stops at the counter. She sets down a black card. Was quiet at 6 in the morning. Not peaceful quiet. Not the kind that makes you breathe slower and feel small in a good way. The kind of quiet that sits on your chest like something unfinished, that reminds you every single time of exactly what's missing from it. Loretta Simpson stood in front of a gray stone marker at the edge of a Memphis cemetery, and she didn't cry. Past crying had been for a good while now. 15 years is long enough to run out of tears. But she still came back every year, same morning, same woman in the same navy coat that had absorbed more of her life than any piece of clothing had a right to. Stone, James Simmons, 1951-2009. He believed first. She'd chosen those words herself, argued with the engraver about the font size for 20 minutes. Paid extra to get it right, because that was what he did. He believed in her before she believed in anything. Before the company, before the money, before the 63 hotels and the magazine covers, she still felt faintly embarrassed about whenever someone left one open on a coffee table. She believed first. She crouched down, knees registering their opinion as they Izzos did these days. She placed one white carnation against the base of the stone. Roses. James thought roses were theatrical. White carnations, he used to say. Simple, honest, like you. She'd never told him she found that both genuinely touching and slightly insulting at the same time. She stood back up, brushed her palms on her jeans. "I'm going back today, James," she said quietly. "The way you finish a conversation that's been going on for 15 years and has no intention of stopping. To the one that started everything." She waited. The way you wait when teasing someone who isn't there anymore, but whose silence has become its own kind of answer. She walked away, didn't look back. That was a different kind of woman's move, and Loretta Mae Simmons had never been that kind of woman. She'd been other kinds, though. She'd been 21 years old and hungry and so completely certain that if she showed up dressed right and answered every question right, the world would see past the part of her it was determined not to see. Memphis, 1987. The hotel was nothing special. 2 stars on a generous day. The kind of hotel where the lobby carpet had patterns designed specifically to camouflage stains. She wore a skirt suit she'd bought on a 3-month layaway plan, which felt like a ridiculous amount of sacrifice for an interview at a building with peel and sticks ceiling tiles. But she'd worn it anyway, because that was what you did. You showed up. You tried. You believed the trying would be enough. The man behind the desk looked at her application, then at her, then back at the application, as if checking whether the two things matched. "We're looking for someone more polished," he said. Just like that, dropped it on the counter between them like it was a perfectly reasonable thing to say. She walked home, 12 blocks in interview heels, because she'd spent her bus fare on pantyhose. And when she got there, James was on the porch with 2 glasses of sweet tea because he always knew. He could read her from a block away, said he'd been able to do it since the first week they met. "James," she said, sitting down, "what does polished mean?" He took her hand, held it the way he always held it, like it was worth being careful with. "Means they're afraid of what you'd become," he said. And they should be. She didn't believe him then. She does now. Nashville, 1998. Loretta Mae Simmons, 32 years old, walking into the Mayfi Grand Hotel with a contract folder under her arm and the singular momentum of a woman running on coffee and 4 hours of sleep and 8 months of work building toward one meeting. The floor, partnership deal, the kind that could change the size of everything. She approached the lobby desk. The young woman behind it looked up at Loretta, looked at the folder, looked back at Loretta. "Are you here for the surface entrance?" Said it so naturally. Any visible awareness that it was a question with weight in it. Loretta didn't answer, didn't explain herself, didn't wave the folder around like a hall pass. She walked to the elevator, pressed 11, and went up and signed the largest contract of her career to that point. On the way out, the young woman was helping someone else. Didn't look up. Loretta didn't stop walking, but she filed something away in the part of her mind that never lost anything. A note to herself, sharp and permanent. Someday I'll build hotels where that question simply doesn't occur to anyone. Where it doesn't have a place to live. That was the plan. That was always the plan. 2009 was the year the plan broke her. James got sick in March, gone by October. 7 months that felt simultaneously like 7 years and like 7 minutes, depending on which memory surfaced and when. She was with him through all of it. Hospital chairs that seemed engineered to defeat the human spine. Treatments that exhausted him in ways she couldn't fix no matter how hard she tried. Nights where she sat beside him and held his hand and talked about nothing important because the important things were too heavy and the nothing things kept him awake in a way that felt like living. The night before he died, she was in the waiting room at 3 in the morning, 43 years old, same clothes she'd had on for 2 days. Eyes like sandpaper, hands that wouldn't stop shaking even when she pressed them flat on her thighs. A young nurse came in, around the room, looked at "Are you with the cleaning crew?" Loretta looked up at her. She wasn't angry. She had nothing left that anger could use. She was hollowed out in the specific way that grief hollows you when it's almost done with the main work and is just finishing the details. "No," Loretta said. "I'm with my husband." The nurse apologized, moved on, probably forgot it before her next break. Loretta never forgot it, because that was the moment, not the indignation, not the flash of being seen wrong again, but the sheer exhaustion of it. The weight of a lifetime of explaining herself to rooms that had already decided. That was the moment she made a decision. Quietly, completely, without drama, I will build something large enough that question runs out of places to land. Not for revenge. Not for a magazine cover. For the next woman sitting in a hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning who deserves to exist in that space without being asked to account for herself. She went home after James passed, sat at the kitchen table for a week, didn't answer the phone much, let the coffee get cold. She opened her laptop, because stopping would have meant he was wrong about her, and James Simmons was never wrong about her. She would not let him start now. The file arrived on a Tuesday. Claudine Parker, executive assistant, 12 years, professionally unflappable in a way that had occasionally made new hires assume she was a machine, sent it with no message. A subject line, FYI, Ellison, Seattle. Loretta opened it on her phone while standing in her kitchen, still in the clothes she'd slept in, holding a cup of coffee that was already cooling. Document complaint archive, Ellison Grand Hotel, Seattle. Total filed cases, 41. Current status, resolved. She set the coffee down. 41 complaints, all marked resolved. She opened 3 at random and read the follow-up notes. The first, guest concern acknowledged. Reminded of protocol. The second, matter reviewed internally, no further action required. The third, guest offered complimentary amenity, case closed. Was it? No investigation names, no dates of review, no record of anyone actually speaking to anyone resolved. As if the word itself was enough. She closed the file, looked at the wall for a moment, thought about the nurse with the clipboard, about the woman in Nashville and the service entrance question. A man in Memphis who'd been afraid of what she might become. Then she called Claudine. "Book me on the first morning flight to Seattle." Pause. Business or first? That coach. Longer pause. I'll explain when I'm back. She didn't explain when she was back. But Claudine, 12 years in, fluent in when questions were welcome and when they were definitively not, booked the coach seat and sent the confirmation without a follow-up. It packed light, the navy coat she'd had since 2015, canvas tote bag, flat shoes, the phone she kept her whole life in. No luggage that needed checking, no schedule in anyone else's hands. She had one destination and a very clear idea of what she was going to find there. Loretta Mae Simmons walked through the glass doors of the Ellison Grand Hotel at 9:47 in the morning, alone. The lobby was beautiful, she'd give it that. The renovation had held over 13 years better than she'd dared hope. The marble still gleamed. The light still fell through the windows at the angle she'd fought the architect about for an entire afternoon in 2010. The plants were real. She'd specified that in the contract in capital letters after 3 other properties had quietly swapped them for silk once the opening photographers left. Someone had kept the plants real. She noticed that. Filed it. She'd built this hotel, not in the executive oversight sense. Walked the construction site in steel-toed boots, argue about floor tile, sat in the empty shell of this lobby, before furniture, before lighting, when it was raw concrete and exposed and wiring, and the smell of sawdust and something that felt dangerously like possibility, and tried to imagine what it would become. She'd bought it in 2011, 45 years old, barely enough in the account to cover the down payment and 6 months of operating costs. James had been gone 2 years. She'd signed the papers at a folding table. Someone had set up in the corner because the furniture wasn't in yet, and she'd done it with hands that wouldn't quite hold still, and she hadn't told anyone that part. He had been back since opening day. She crossed the marble floor now and clocked the front desk in the first 3 seconds. 3 people, 1 woman, mid-30s, dark ponytail, attention directed at her screen in a way that was slightly too deliberate. 1 young man, late 20s, arms crossed at an angle that was performing casual and achieving something else. And in the middle, the man in charge. You could tell by the way he occupied the space, slightly forward, the posture of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that this particular rectangle of floor belonged to him. Gerald Whitmore, 52, 9 years at this property. His photo had been in Claudine's file. He looked at Loretta. She watched his eyes run the assessment, the fast-practiced, deeply unreliable calculus that trained eyes make when someone walks in carrying a canvas bag and wearing flat shoes and nothing that announces itself. Calculation completed. He looked back at his screen. Loretta walked to the desk. "Good morning. I have a reservation." Set house suite. Name is Simmons. Before Gerald could respond, Loretta registered movement at the concierge desk to her left. A young woman, name tag, said Marisol, had looked up from her screen, and her face was doing something different from everyone else's face in this lobby. Not the assessment, not the careful professional blankness, something that looked like recognition, and right beside it, something that looked like conflict. Marisol looked at her screen, looked at Gerald, looked back at her screen, pressed her lips together, said nothing. Gerald typed slowly. The specific deliberateness of someone making a point without technically making a point. "That's a premium tier suite," he said. "Are you certain this is the correct property?" It was. Not a question. Not really. A door, politely framed, professionally worded, designed to make her feel like she owed him an apology for standing where she was standing and asking for something she'd already paid for. Loretta had walked into that door enough times in her life to describe the grain of the wood. She didn't take the exit. "I'm certain," she said. She placed her ID and her black card on the counter. Gerald picked up the card. With 2 fingers, the way you handle something you haven't about yet. Turned it over, looked at it the way people look at things, presenting them with informations they don't want. He said, which was not a word. It was a verdict delivered in 1 syllable. Brenda Holt, ponytail, mid-30s, the one who'd been looking at her screen with slightly too much focus, reached under the desk. Small movement. Practice. The motion of someone who had made it before and knew exactly where the button was. Security. The young man beside Gerald, Loretta didn't know his name yet, straightened up, rearranged his face into the expression of someone performing official competence. He was maybe 29 years old. He had the confident posture of a person who had been told repeatedly that he was doing the right thing and had stopped examining whether that was true. Gerald, now with visible backup, not quite smiled. "We've had situations like this before," he said. "Cards presented by individuals who perhaps acquired them in ways that don't quite hold up to verification." Gerald, she said his name, just the name, nothing attached to it, no performance, no elevation, no threat. Just the sound of someone who knew it and had decided to use it. He blinked once. "That card has limit," Loretta said. "Call whoever you need to call, a beat." He recovered. The recovery of a man who had never, in 9 years at this desk, faced a consequence he couldn't redirect. So he doubled down, because the alternative was admitting something he wasn't built to admit. "I think what might be most helpful," he said pleasantly, horribly, "is finding you a property better suited to. Return my card to your current needs so we can make sure everyone has the experience that Gerald. Return my card." From the far end of the lobby, a phone went up. OC, 55, travel blogger, a woman who had learned years ago that the camera phone is the only equalizer that works in real time, set her coffee down and pressed record. Quietly, without announcing herself. 3 chairs away, Frank Okafor folded the newspaper he'd been not really reading for 4 minutes and opened his live stream. Frank was 62 and had been a journalist for 3 decades. He knew when he was watching something that needed a witness. He'd known it the way his body knew weather before his brain caught up. "We're at the Ellison Grand Hotel in Seattle," he said to the handful of people initially watching. "And something is happening at the front desk that I think you need to see." The young man, his name tag said, produced a small silver key from under the counter, opened the safe behind the desk with the studied deliberateness of someone performing a procedure they believe carries authority. placed Loretta's card inside. She clicked shut, very loud in the quiet that had gathered. "Your card has been secured," Beckett said, with the genuine confidence of someone who has been "This is correct, pending bank verification." Loretta looked at the safe, looked at Beckett, back at the safe. "You just took my property," she said. "The way you'd note a change in weather. It's standard protocol when." "There is no protocol," Loretta said, "that permits a hotel to confiscate a guest's personal property." Gerald stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you continue to, you're afraid," Loretta said, "of the wrong thing." Gerald paused, then said to Brenda, not quite under his breath, not quite quiet enough, "People like her always think a card gets them anywhere." Not a whisper, not in a room that had gone progressively stiller, not with Frank Okafor's phone angled from 15 feet away. Comment count on Frank's live stream jumped. At the concierge desk, Marisol Vega heard it. She'd heard things like it before. Little softer, more carefully coded versions of the same thing, delivered in the tones of reasonable professional guidance. She had filed them where she filed many things in 5 years at this property, in the internal folder labeled "Not My Call." My place. Just get through the shift. But something about today was different. Maybe it was the way Loretta stood. Performing anything, not asking for anything beyond what she'd already paid for. Just present. Fully, quietly, immovably present, the way a person stands once they know exactly who they are and have decided that someone else's confusion about it is no longer their problem to manage. Marisol had worked in hospitality for 5 years. She had never seen anyone stand like that at this desk. She had seen a great many people stand like the opposite of that. She stepped away from the concierge desk, toward the front, toward Loretta. "Don't," Gerald said, without looking, like he'd been waiting for it. Marisol stopped, but she didn't go back. "Her reservation is valid," she said, even, clear. "I checked this morning when the system flagged her arrival. Booking is confirmed, and there's a tag on her profile." Marisol found her access, she said. "Priority handling. It was on your screen, Gerald." "The same screen I was looking at." The lobby went quieter than it had been yet. Gerald's jaw moved once, like he was running a calculation, and the result was refusing to cooperate with what he wanted it to say. "One more word," he said, "and you can start looking for somewhere else to work." He'd said those words before. 9 years worth of before. They had always landed the way they were meant to land. Marisol's hands were pressed against her sides. She could feel them trembling. She pressed harder. She didn't move. Loretta looked at her, just for a moment, just long enough, and gave her something small. "The kind that's I see you. I see exactly what this is that's costing you, and I see you doing it anyway." Loretta reached into her coat pocket and took out her phone. "Claudine," she said, "it's time." 4 blocks away, on the 6th floor of a building with no particular connection to hospitality and every connection to systems that kept 63 hotels functioning without most people knowing who was running them, Claudine Parker was already at her keyboard. She had been at her keyboard since the moment Loretta's phone connected. She pressed one key in the staff-facing management system of the Ellison Grand Hotel. In the corner of the screen at Gerald Whitmore's desk, visible to every authenticated staff login on the property, an alert materialized. "On-premise, instant progress. All actions logged from this point forward." Gerald's personal phone vibrated on the desk. He reached for it automatically. The reflex of a man who managed by information, who had always believed that knowing something first was the same as controlling it. He read the alert. The color in his face did something it had not done yet today. It left, not gradually. All at once. Like someone had cut a wire. Loretta was watching when it happened. She saw the precise moment the confidence he'd carried through this morning, the 9 years behind this desk certainty of a man who had never been wrong in a room he controlled, began to show its errors. She said nothing. She waited. Because Loretta Mae Simmons had turned by 30 years and 63 properties, and a husband who had believed first, and a nurse who should have known better, and a man in Memphis who had been afraid of what she'd become, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is give someone all the rope they need. Let them choose what to do with it themselves. Gerald looked up from his phone, looked at Loretta. For the first time since she had walked through those doors, he did not look certain. He looked like a man who had just understood, slowly and badly, that the thing he thought he was managing had never been manageable. "Marisol," Loretta said, without shifting her gaze from Gerald's face, "you don't have to go anywhere." Marisol stopped pressing her hands against her sides. straightened her shoulders, stayed exactly where she was. The lobby held something that was not quite breath and not quite silence, but somewhere between the two. The particular suspension of a room full of people who understand they are watching something they will not forget. Okafor's phone stayed perfectly still, perfectly aimed. His live stream had passed 400 viewers. It was climbing, and Loretta Mae Simmons stood in the center of her own lobby, navy coat, canvas bag, flat shoes on marble she had chosen herself, and waited for what came next. What came next was hers to determine. It always had been. 400 viewers became 900 in the time it took Gerald Whitmore to put his phone back in his pocket. 900 became 2,000 by the time he decided the alert on his screen was something he could still manage. It wasn't. But Gerald is the kind of man who had been managing things, or telling himself he was managing things, which is an entirely different skill and produces an entirely different results, for 9 years at this desk. 9 years of being the one who decided, the one who read the room and adjusted accordingly and kept the machine running in the direction he wanted it to run. Built a professional identity around it, around the idea that his instincts were reliable, that his judgment was sound. The subtle architecture of control he'd constructed, the tone of voice, the careful deployment of authority, the knowing when to press and when to retreat, was something other people couldn't see because they weren't looking closely enough. He straightened his jacket, squared his shoulders, and looked at the lobby full of raised phones like it was a minor inconvenience he'd navigated this before. But Gerald didn't know that yet, and that gap between what he believed he was still capable of controlling and what was already entirely beyond him was the most dangerous few minutes of his professional life. Hadn't arrived at knowing that yet. The pivot, when it came, was smooth. Gerald Whitmore did not know many things in this moment, but he knew pivots. Been making them for 9 years. You find the person in the room who has less power than you do. You redirect the pressure there. You frame it as procedure. You make it sound like you're defending the institution rather than yourself. Turn to Marisol. You disclosed internal list of information to unverified individual, he said. Pleasant voice he used when he wanted something to sound like policy rather than retaliation. Is a terminable offense. It is outlined in your employment agreement. Page 11, Section 4. Marisol's, she's not unverified. Am placing you on immediate administrative leave pending a formal. You saw the tag, Gerald. He stopped. Looking at the same screen I was looking at. You saw founder access. You saw priority handling, and you made a choice about what to do with that information. The lobby was very quiet. Those are system labels, Gerald said. They don't constitute. They constitute exactly what they say they constitute, Marisol said. Same tone throughout. Same register. Like she had decided, somewhere in the last 3 minutes, that she was done modulating herself for Gerald Whitmore's comfort. Worked here for 5 years. I know what the tags mean. You know what the tags mean. Gerald's jaw tightened. You are one complaint away from. Marisol said, from being placed on leave for telling the truth. Writing. Some saw in the lobby, someone started clapping. One person, then a second person, joined. Gerald's neck went red. Loretta watched all of this. She didn't move, didn't perform any reaction, just watched Marisol Vega stand in the middle of her own employment consequences and not blink. Watched her do the thing that cost the most, not the dramatic gesture, not the speech, but the simple, devastating refusal to pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. Was the thing that cost the most in Loretta's experience. Not courage, not confrontation, the refusal to unsee. She had spent 30 years building a company full of people who unsee, who look at what's happening and find the professional language to describe it as something else, as brand standards, as protocol, as instinct, as the kind of judgment that can't be written down because writing it down would require calling it what it actually was. 41 complaints, all resolved, all unseen. She took out her phone, not to call, to read the second message Claudine had sent 4 minutes ago, which she'd opened and set aside because she needed to watch this play out first. Howard is en route. 20 minutes. And Loretta, there's more. The file I sent didn't have everything. Call me when you can step away. She put the phone back in her pocket. Not yet. Frank Okafor had been a journalist for 31 years. He had covered city council meetings that turned into corruption investigations. Sat across from people who were lying to him and watched their faces manage the lie. He had walked into rooms where something was happening and understood within 60 minutes whether it was a story or just noise. This was a story. He knew it the way his body knew things before his brain finished processing them. Some old reporter instinct worn into the bone by 3 decades of watching people under pressure. The way a person stands when they're telling the truth. The way a room sounds when it understands something important is being decided inside it. He adjusted the angle of his phone slightly. His live stream had passed 2,000 viewers. The comments were moving fast enough that reading them required skimming. One stopped him. He read it twice, then a third time. "Hold on," he said to the people watching. Performed, not theatrical, the actual voice of a journalist reading something and needing a moment to verify it with himself. Someone in the comments, a few people now, are saying Simmons, as in Loretta Simmons, as in Simmons' hospitality group. He lowered the phone slightly, looked at Loretta the way you look at someone when you're trying to match them to information you've just received, and the match is disorienting. The navy coat, the canvas bag, the flat shoes, the complete and total absence of any visible concern about any of this. Back at his screen, did a quick search, read what came up. 63 hotels, he said, mostly to himself. 22 states. He raised the phone again. "Ma'am," he said across the lobby. "Careful, is this your hotel?" Every head in the room turned. Loretta looked at him, a look that said, "I know what you're asking. I know why you're asking it, and I'm going to answer it exactly once." She said, frank. "Then why'd you walk in without? Without what?" She tilted her head, not combative. Genuinely asking, a different bag, a sign around my neck, a different coat. She let the question sit for exactly the right amount of time. Every person who walks through that door is a guest. That's what this place is supposed to mean, and it's supposed to mean it before anyone proves anything. Frank closed his mouth. The lobby sat with that, and in the front of the lobby at the desk he had stood behind for 9 years, Gerald Whitmore's face did something it had not done yet today. Understood, not everything, not enough to matter yet, but some crucial corner of what he believed about himself received new information and processed it and delivered a result he didn't want and couldn't undeliver. This is real. She is who they're saying she is, and I have been. He stopped that thought, filed it somewhere he didn't intend to open again. Up straighter, because Gerald Whitmore did not accept that he was wrong. He had never accepted that he was wrong. He found new angles from which to be right, and he found them quickly, and he had been doing it for 9 years without anyone stopping him. He just needed one more angle now. He looked at the lobby, at the phones, at the woman who had not moved an inch since she walked through those doors. And he reached for the intercom. The intercom click was very loud. "Attention all staff, security to the front lobby. Authorized individual on premises. Do not engage until security arrives. This is not a drill." The words echoed off marble and glass and came back sounding smaller than Gerald had intended. Because the lobby didn't respond the way lobbies were supposed to respond to announcements of unauthorized individuals. Nobody moved away from Loretta. A few people moved toward her. Not dramatically, just subtly repositioning, the way people do when they've decided which side of something they're on. Vivian Osei didn't lower her phone. Frank's livestream crossed 4,000 viewers. Loretta stood exactly where she'd been standing. Gerald released the intercom button, looked at what he'd accomplished, which was nothing useful, and made the decision to escalate again, because that was the only gear he had left. Control slips, press harder. That was the mechanism. It had always been the mechanism. "I'm calling the police," he said. To the lobby as much as to Loretta, an announcement, a last resort delivered like a trump card. All right, just those 2 words. No alarm in them, no performance of calm, actual calm, the specific calm of someone who has already thought through what happens next and is comfortable with all of it. Gerald dialed, spoke briefly, hung up, and then Loretta did something none of them expected. She walked to the corner of the lobby, to the leather chair, dark brown, positioned near the window where the morning light came through. She sat down, back, both hands resting on her knees, the posture of a woman who had nowhere to be and all the time that existed to be there. She was going to wait. Frank Okafor live-streamed it in real time. She just sat down, he said quietly, to the 7,000 people now watching. In her own hotel, and she is going to wait them out. The chat exploded. Beckett Pruitt, standing near the wall where he'd retreated when the intercom announcement didn't produce the results Gerald seemed to expect, watched Loretta sit down and felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. Something that had been assembled wrong from the beginning and was only now showing him the seams. He was 29 years old. He had grown up in Tacoma in a house where you worked hard, and you didn't ask questions above your station. And you were grateful for a good job when you found one, and you'd follow the person above you because they had more experience, and who were you to know better? Gerald Whitmore had hired him 8 months ago, had trained him personally, had explained in the reasonable, authoritative tones of a man who clearly knew how things worked that Ellison Grand was a premium property serving a specific clientele, and that part of maintaining the guest experience was reading situations accurately. Trusting your instincts. Knowing who belonged and acting accordingly. Beckett had trusted his instincts. He was beginning to understand that he had not been trusting his instincts. He had been trusting Gerald's instincts, which had been presented to him as his own so consistently for 8 months, that the boundary between them had disappeared without him noticing. Look, the safe, the closed safe that held the card of a woman who, according to 7,000 people on a live stream and the management system tag that Marisol had read aloud, had built this hotel. He crossed to the safe, opened it, took out the card. He walked around the end of the desk and crossed the lobby and stopped in front of Loretta. She looked up. He placed the card on the armrest beside her, carefully, like it deserved to be handled carefully, which it did and which he should have understood 8 minutes ago. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. He made himself hold eye contact because not holding it felt like one more small cowardice in a morning that had already had enough of those. "I don't have a good explanation for what I did." Loretta looked at him steadily, not with anger, with the particular quality of attention she gave to things she was trying to understand rather than judge. "How long have you worked here, Beckett?" 8 months. In 8 months, did anyone ever tell you that you were allowed to disagree with Gerald? Opened his mouth, closed it, because the honest answer was no, and they both already knew the honest answer was no. "That's what I thought," she said. She picked up the card. "That changes today, for everyone in this building, starting now." She said it simply, not as absolution, not as a gift, as a fact about what was going to be true from this point forward. Nodded, stepped back, and for the first time in 8 months, he did not look toward Gerald to find out where to stand. Eleanor Voss was 68 years old. She had the posture of a woman who had spent decades in rooms where people talked over her and had developed, as a result, a precise understandings of exactly when to be and exactly how to do it so that she could not be talked over. She had been sitting near the windows since before Loretta arrived. She had watched the entire thing accumulate, the desk, the card, the intercom, the safe, with the patience of someone who has seen variations of this before and knows what it adds up to. She stood up now, walked to the edge of where the crowd had loosely gathered, and when the room took one of its collect breaths, she stepped into the pause. "Free of this year," she said, not loud, but the specific register that carries without effort. "My husband uses a wheelchair. I have stayed at this property 3 times over the past 4 years. In February, we were given a room on the 3rd floor with no elevator access from our wing. When I asked Gerald directly, she looked at him across the lobby. He told me the team had done their best with available inventory. That night in the lobby, in those chairs, she gestured toward the seating area. My husband, who uses a wheelchair. In those chairs all night. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She sat back down. Gerald, Mrs. Voss, that situation was resolved," she said. "Yes, I received the email." A man across the lobby cleared his throat. Necessity 1, navy jacket, the look of someone who had arrived at a decision while Eleanor was speaking. "Last spring," he said. "My son and his husband had a confirmed reservation at this property. Confirmation number, email, everything. They were told at this desk that the reservation couldn't be located." Paused. "I came up to the desk 20 minutes later and asked the same question. It was located immediately." He didn't explain what was different between himself and his son. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room could do that arithmetic. A woman near the elevator bank, maybe 50, holding a small suitcase like she'd been about to check in and had changed her mind about that while watching. "I complained about how I was spoken to at this desk 18 months ago. An email that said my feedback had been shared with the team. Nothing else. No follow-up. No call. Shared with the team." Frank's camera moved slowly across the faces. No commentary, because this was the kind of moment that commentary would only diminish. Loretta stood in the center of it and let it come. This was the part nobody warned you about, the part that had nothing to do with winning or losing or being vindicated. Each voice was a person, a night that had gone wrong, a question that should never have been asked, a door that should have opened and hadn't. And when you were standing in the accumulation of them, one after another, the weight of it had nothing to do with triumph and everything to do with cost. 41 names in a file on her phone, but a file was not the same as a room full of voices. A file was numbers and dates and the sanitized language of administrative resolution. This was what the numbers actually contained. People who had come here and been made to feel like they owed someone an explanation for existing in a room they'd paid to be in. Counted to 30. Internal, private. Then she took out her phone. Claudine's message was waiting. Howard is here, lobby level. And you need to see the attachment before he shows it to Gerald. The lobby waited, not the electric waiting of earlier, the held breath quality of people watching something unfold that they couldn't look away from. This was different, the waiting of a room that had already absorbed significant things and was bracing for whatever came next. Howard Nash stood beside the desk with the leather folder open. Gerald was behind the desk, no longer behind it in the way that mattered. The authority had drained out of the position even if his body was still technically occupying it. Loretta was in the leather chair in the corner, straight back, both hands resting on her knees, the posture of a woman who had decided to wait and was doing so completely, without impatience, without performance. Gerald looked at her. He looked at Howard. He looked at the lobby full of phones and the faces behind them and the door he could walk out of and the desk he couldn't hide behind anymore. Then he made the last move available to a man who has run out of moves but cannot bring himself to accept that. Calling the police, he said. He said it loudly, clearly, the announcement of someone who still believes that the arrival of authority will reset a situation in his favor because authority has always reset situations in his favor before. Is how the world has worked for him for 52 years, and he does not have the information yet to understand that today is different. Loretta didn't move. All right, she said, just those two words, no alarm in them, no performance of calm, actual calm, the specific stillness of someone who has already thought through every branch of what happens next and is comfortable with all of them. Gerald dialed, spoke briefly, hung up. Loretta looked at the leather chair beside her, the dark brown one, positioned near the window, where the October morning light came through at exactly the angle she'd specified in 2010. To it, sat down, straight back, hands on her knees, and she waited. Frank Okafor was still filming. Spoke quietly to the camera, to the 14,000 people watching. She just sat down, he said, in her own hotel. She is going to wait them out. The comment section moved faster than anyone could read it. Vivian Osasi had switched to her second phone. The first one was too hot to hold. Brenda Holt was very still behind the desk. Her hands were flat on the counter. She was looking at a point somewhere between the surface in front of her and the floor below it. The gaze of someone has stopped pretending to do anything useful and is trying to understand what she's responsible for. Pruitt was near the wall. He had been near the wall since returning the card. He was 29 years old, and he was in the process of reorganizing something significant about himself, which is not a comfortable process even when it is necessary. Especially when it is necessary. Gerald stood behind the desk and did not speak. Nobody spoke. The lobby held the particular silence of a room in which everything that needed to be said has been said, and everyone is simply waiting for the consequences to arrive. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, they did. Officer Patricia Dunn came through the glass doors of the Ellis Grand Hotel with the walk of someone who has entered a significant number of rooms under a significant variety of circumstances and has developed, over 27 years, a reliable and rapid system for reading them. She read this one in approximately 8 seconds. Large lobby, significant crowd, significant number of raised phones, which meant this had been happening for a while, and people had decided it was worth documenting. One man at the front desk with the expression of someone who had called for help and was already beginning to understand that help was not going to arrive in the form he'd imagined. One woman in a corner chair with the stillness of someone who had already won whatever this was and was simply waiting for the formalities to complete. Patricia walked past Gerald. She crossed the lobby to the corner, stopped in front of Loretta. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "I'm fine, officer. Thank you for coming. Can you tell me I'm waiting?" Loretta said, "for the manager to be escorted from my property." Patricia absorbed this. Turned to Gerald. "Sir," she said, "I'm going to need your employee credentials and the incident documentation that prompted this call." I called you because your credentials, sir, please." Gerald reached for his badge, the badge that was authenticating nothing because Claudine had locked his system access from 4 blocks away over an hour ago. He held it up, looked at it, looked at Patricia, looked at the badge again, as though the problem might resolve itself if he gave it enough time. I'm the general manager, he said. 9 years at this property. And I'd like to see documentation of that, Patricia said. Whenever you're ready. The lobby waited. From the corner chair, Loretta watched Gerald Whitmore stand at his own desk, unable to verify his identity to the officer he had summoned himself. She did not smile. She did not perform anything. This moment did not call for performance. It called for witness. So she witnessed it. And Frank Okafor's livestream crossed 16,000 viewers and kept cackling. And in the comments section, moving faster than anyone could read, someone wrote, "She's just been sitting in that chair like she owns the place." Which, of course, she did. She always had. The police report took 11 minutes to complete. 11 minutes during which Gerald Whitmore stood at his own desk and answered Officer Patricia Dunn's questions in the voice of a man reciting a version of events that no longer matched the evidence in the room. 11 minutes during which Howard Nash stood nearby with the leather folder open, saying nothing because the folder said everything that needed saying. 11 minutes during which the lobby maintained the particular stillness of a space that has already decided what it thinks and is waiting for the official proceedings to catch up. Patricia finished. She looked at Gerald for a measured moment. "Sir," she said, "I'd recommend stepping back from the desk." Question, not quite a command. The tone of someone offering a person one final opportunity to make the correct choice themselves before the choice gets made for them. Gerald stepped back. 1 step. Then 2, until he was standing behind the desk in the way you stand somewhere, when you are no longer the person in charge, but have not yet finished the internal work of accepting that. Patricia made a brief note in her report, looked at Loretta in the corner chair, gave a small nod, the professional acknowledgement of a situation understood and a next step implicit, then stepped aside. The room shifted, not dramatically, not all at once. The way a room shifts is when the last official obstacle has been removed and what remains is simply what's true. Loretta looked at her hands for a moment, then at the corner of the lobby where she'd sat. Then at the center of it, the open space of marble floor between the desk and the door, where the morning light came through the tall windows at the angle she'd specified in 2010 and had stopped being glad she'd fought for. She stood up from chair. She moved without hurry, without performance, the way she did everything when she was certain, not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular economy of motion that belongs to someone who knows exactly where they are going and sees no reason to rush or to delay. Walked to the center of the lobby, stopped there, looked around it slowly. The chandeliers, the marble, the plants that were real, because she had specified it in capital letters, the people and their phones, Eleanor Voss in her chair near the window, Frank with his live stream that had crossed 20,000 viewers sometime in the last few minutes, Mara Sull still standing where she had planted herself 2 hours ago and had not moved from since. Loretta Mae Simmons started to talk, not loudly, not for the cameras, though the cameras were there, not with the polished cadence of someone who had prepared remarks. She hadn't prepared anything. She had simply arrived at the point where silence was no longer a reasonable option, and so she spoke with the voice of a 58-year-old woman who had run out of patience for anything less than the unvarnished truth and had decided this room was going to hear it. "My name is Loretta Mae Simmons," she said. "I started this company 30 years ago with $8,000, a pickup truck with a transmission that made a sound nobody could ever quite diagnose, and a husband who believed I could do it before I believed it myself. That was completely still. James passed in 2009. I kept building, because stopping would have meant he was wrong about me. Paused. Let that breathe. He was never wrong about me. Someone near the elevator made a small involuntary sound. Quite a word. The sound of something landing where it needed to land. This building, this specific lobby, this floor I'm standing on right now, is where I sent the papers that changed everything. I was 45 years old. I sat at a folding table someone had set up in the corner because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. And I signed with hands that wouldn't quite hold still because I couldn't believe it was real, that any of it was real. She looked at the floor for a moment, just a moment. Today I walked back through those doors. Same coat I've had for 9 years. Bag I take everywhere. Same woman who built this place. And within 9 minutes walking in, I was told in this lobby, in front of everyone in this room, that it didn't belong here. That sentence stand entirely by itself. Let it take up the space it deserved, so let me be very clear about something. I want everyone in this room to understand it, and I want everyone watching to understand it, and I want it on record. Her voice didn't rise. It got more precise, which was more effective than rising. This was never about one man making one bad judgment call on one Tuesday morning. One man does not build a system like this alone. He needs people willing to look away. He needs a structure that rewards them for it. And he needs someone above him who puts 6 words in an email that give him all the permission he needs to do exactly what he did today, to look at a person walking through the door of a place they paid to be in and decide, before she opens her mouth, that she doesn't fit. She looked at Gerald, he looked back, and for the first time today he looked like what he actually was, a man standing in a lobby that wasn't his anymore, understanding, finally and completely, the full dimension of what he had done. 41 guests, Loretta said. 41 complaints filed at this property. Every single one marked resolved. Not one of them actually investigated. One. She reached into her coat pocket, took out her phone, read from the screen. February 2022. Guest in wheelchair placed in room with no elevator access. Resolved. Guest offered complimentary amenity. October 2021. Guests confirmed reservation unable to be located at check-in. Resolved. Reservation later found. No further action required. 2023. Guest reported feeling unwelcome and spoken to dismissively at front desk. Resolved. Staff reminded of protocol. She put the phone back in her pocket. Reminded of protocol, she said. That was the whole investigation. That was how 41 people were told their experience didn't matter enough for anyone to look at it honestly. Eleanor Voss, by the window, pressed her lips together. The man in the navy jacket, Bernard, looked at the floor. The woman near the elevator had stopped pretending she wasn't crying. Dignity, Loretta said, is not something a person earns by arriving in the right clothes or carrying the right bag or saying the right name. It is the starting point. It is what every person walks through every door already carrying. And the moment someone requires you to prove it, they have already failed you. Talking. The lobby held its silence for 3 full seconds. Then Eleanor Voss started clapping, not the explosive applause of a crowd following a cue. The deliberate, measured clapping of a 68-year-old woman who has decided something deserves to be marked and is marking it. Person. Steady. A second person joined, then a third. Frank Okafor lowered his phone for the first time in over 2 hours. Not because he was finished, because some moments need to be met with your actual eyes, rather than through a screen. Tench Whitmore stood behind the desk and did not move, and the lobby that Loretta Mae Simmons had built from $8,000 in 14 months, and hands that wouldn't hold still, received what she had said and held it. Sandra Cole's voice came through Howard's phone speaker at 12:31, clear, measured, the voice of someone who has delivered consequential decisions before and has learned that delivery is its own form of respect for the gravity of the moment and for everyone in it. Gerald Whitmore, she said, effective immediately, your employment with Simmons Hospitality Group is terminated. Your system access credentials have been revoked as of 11:42 this morning. Formal documentation will be delivered to your address on file within 48 hours. You are not to return to this or any Simmons property in a professional capacity. On Gerald's lanyard, he emitted one short indicator light. He looked down at it. Just for a moment, a flash there and gone. That was not anger and not defiance, but something rawer than either. The face of a man who has just understood, in the specific way you understand things when they become irreversible, the full dimension of the mistake he has been making. For 9 years, then it was gone, and Gerald Whitmore straightened his jacket one final time, reached for nothing because nothing on this desk belonged to him, and walked across the lobby toward the glass doors. He didn't look at Loretta, he didn't look at anyone. The doors opened. He walked through them, and they closed behind him with the ordinary sound of a door closing, which was somehow the most final sound the lobby had produced all morning. The room exhaled. Brenda Holt had not moved from behind the desk. She'd been standing in the same spot for most of the last 2 hours. Same posture, the posture of someone waiting to find out what happens to them. 2 kids, 7 and 9, a job she needed in a city where the math of surviving didn't leave much room for error. Brenda crossed to the desk, stopped across from her. What are their names? She asked. Brenda blinked. Excuse me. What are their names? Maya, Brenda said slowly, like she wasn't sure this was actually the question. Loretta nodded, stored it. How long have you been at this property? 4 years. And in 4 years, did anyone above you ever tell you that you were allowed to push back on Gerald? There was a path that didn't end with your job if you disagreed with him? Brenda's jaw tightened. She looked down, looked back up. No, she said, that's what I thought. Loretta held her gaze. What you did this morning, pressing that button, watching what happened, and staying quiet, that was wrong. Not going to pretend it wasn't. You made choices today that hurt someone. Brent didn't look away. I know. I also know that Gerald built this environment deliberately, that the cost of doing anything different designed to feel unsurvivable. He made sure of that. It wasn't an accident. That doesn't make what I did okay. No, Loretta said. But it's context. And context matters to how I think about what happens next. Brenda waited. You're staying, Loretta said. Full retraining under new supervision. Fresh start with a clean record. But Brenda, and I need you to hear this, if you ever find yourself in a room where something else like this morning is happening again, whether it's at this property or anywhere else in your life, you have a choice. Have always had a choice. It just wasn't safe before. And now I'm making it safe. Brenda looked at the desk, at the lobby, at Loretta. Thank you, she said, quietly. The specific quiets of someone who owes done and they don't entirely deserve the thing they're being given and intends to spend a significant amount of time being worth it. Loretta gave her a nod that meant, I know, that's enough, get to work. Beckett Pruitt was still near the wall. He had not moved much since returning the card, had been standing in the particular stillness of a 29-year-old in the process of reorganizing a significant portion of what he believed about himself and the choices he'd made over the past 8 months. A comfortable process. It was the right one. Loretta walked over. He straightened, not from nerves, from something more deliberate. Posture of someone paying attention. One question, she said. Okay, in 8 months, was there a single moment where something felt wrong? Where something Gerald asked you to do made you stop even for half a second and think, wait, what's quiet fit for 4 seconds? Genuinely thinking, not constructing. Yes, he said. What did you do with that moment? Filed it, he said. Under not my place to know better than someone with 9 years. Loretta looked at him steadily. That folder is closed now. From this point forward, your judgment belongs to you. Whoever is standing above you in the org chart, I understand, I hope you do, because I need people in this company who can tell the difference between following reasonable guidance and following someone off a cliff. She paused. You're staying under Marisol. Watch how she runs this place. There's more to learn from her than from 9 years of Gerald. She walked away before he could respond, which was in itself a lesson about what authority actually looked like when it didn't need to be acknowledged. Howard Nash had commandeered the small conference room off the lobby. It wasn't a proper office, a round table, 4 chairs, a window that looked out onto the sixth state, but it had a door that closed, which was what they needed. Loretta sat across from him. The leather folder was open between them. Howard had added pages to it since arriving. Printed sheets from Claudine's research, email chains, complaint archives, dates running back further than Loretta had expected. Walk me through it, she said. Howard turned to the first page. Guest complaint archive starts in 2017. That's when the new complaint logging system was implemented company-wide. Before that, records were kept at the property level and were not centrally accessible, meaning Benton could manage what got seen. Meaning Benton controlled what got escalated. Yes, Howard turned a page. The email chain you've read, the 17 emails between Benton and Gerald, begins in March 2018. 5 months after Benton was appointed regional director for the Pacific Northwest. Who appointed him? Richard Calloway, your predecessor at the executive level. Retired in 2016. Loretta absorbed this, so Calloway hired Benton. Benton hired Gerald's philosophy, if not Gerald directly. Gerald was already at this property when Benton took the region. But the emails suggest Benton identified Gerald as someone who would implement his approach without requiring explicit instruction. Someone who already thought the same way. Or was willing to act like he did when given institutional cover. Howard turned another page. The phrase guest fit appears in correspondence to 3 other property managers in the Pacific Northwest region. Different hotels, same language, same quarter. Loretta looked at the page. 4 names, 4 properties. Who are they? 2 have already retired from the company. 1 is still active. Marcus Webb, Bellingham property. We flagged his complaint record this morning. 11 cases, all marked resolved, all within Benton's tenure. Get Howard's team to Bellingham this week. Already scheduled. She turned the page herself. Stopped. These aren't 6 years of emails, she said. She read the date on the document at the bottom of the stack. This goes back to 2015. His predecessor, a regional director named Alan Marsh, retired in 2016, appears in 4 emails from 2015 to early 2016 using similar language. Identical, but similar enough that our legal team believes the approach predates Benton's appointment. Loretta set the page down. She looked at the window, the side street, a delivery truck moving, slowly, someone walking a dog. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon of a city that had no idea what was happening 40 feet away inside this conference room. Didn't start with Gerald, she said. No, it didn't start with Benton. Probably not, though Benton formalized it. Put it in writing, made it transmittable. Which is worse, she said, in a way, because in formal prejudice you can name and address person by person. Documented, distributed, institutionally protected prejudice requires a different kind of response, Howard said. Yes. She looked back at the folder. How many total complaints across all affected properties? Howard turned to the last page. Based on what we've pulled in the last 3 hours, and this is incomplete, we're still going through records. We're looking at a minimum of 112 cases. Across 4 properties, over 9 years, 112, not 41. 112 people who had walked into a hotel they'd paid to be in, experienced something that was wrong, reported it, and been handed a form letter, a KX number that said resolved while somewhere system she was responsible for. The resolution was a fiction. Loretta sat with that number for a moment, not performing anything, just sitting with it, letting it be as heavy as it actually was. We're going to find every single one, she said. We will, and we're going to contact them, not a form letter. A peer statement. Actual contact from an actual person with an actual acknowledgement of what happened and what should have happened instead. Will take considerable time and resources. Yes, she said. It will. She closed the folder. What does Benton know right now? Nothing yet. He's in Scottsdale. We haven't made contact. Don't. Not until we have everything documented and the legal strategy is clear. Don't want him preparing a narrative before we know the full shape of what we're dealing with. Howard nodded. Made a note. And Calloway? Loretta said. 73, lives in Portland. We haven't established whether he had direct knowledge or was simply negligent in his oversight of Benton's appointment and supervision. Find out. She stood up, because there is a difference between a man who built something evil and a man who didn't look hard enough to see it being built. I need to know which one I'm dealing with before I decide what happens next. She picked up the folder. It back to Howard. We're not going to drag anyone through the press before we know what's true, she said. But we're also not going to protect anyone because it's easier than not protecting them. We do this correctly. We do it completely. And we do not stop until we find the actual bottom of it. Howard looked at her. This is going to be a long 18 months. Yes, she said, it is. She opened the door. The lobby sounds came back. Movement, voices, the particular energy of a space in the process of becoming something different from what it had been. And Howard, she said without turning back, pull the complaint file on Charles Benton's own record at the company. Performance reviews. Any HR flags. I want to know if anyone saw this and said something and was ignored, and if they were. We find them too, she said, and we make it right. The lobby had settled into a different kind of energy. The charged, suspended atmosphere of the morning, the held breath quality of people watching something fold that they couldn't look away from. Something quieter now, the energy of aftermath, of a room that has been through something and is beginning slowly to figure out what comes after. Some guests had left, some had stayed. Eleanor Voss was still in her chair, speaking quietly with the man in the navy jacket, who had introduced himself as Bernard, and who had apparently a great deal to say that Eleanor was listening to with her full attention. Vivian Osei was sitting at one of the lobby tables, laptop open, writing something with the focused efficiency of a person who has been composing sentences in her head for 2 hours and is finally getting them down. Frank Okafor had ended his live stream, but was still in the lobby, sitting with a cup of coffee someone had brought him, not going anywhere in particular. Saul Vega was back at the concierge desk. Not behind it, beside it. The distinction had become in the past few hours a physical embodiment of something she hadn't found the words for yet. Loretta came to stand beside her, not across from her, not in the position of authority assessing someone below it. The specific positioning of a conversation between equals, or near enough. How are you doing? Loretta asked. Marisol considered this. Honestly, I feel like I've been awake for 3 days. You've been carrying something heavy for 5 years, Loretta said. Heavy things are exhausting whether you put them down or keep holding them. Marisol looked at the lobby, at the marble she'd crossed 1,000 times. Desk she'd stood behind through 1,000 shifts, at all of it, through the slightly different lessons of a person who had done something today that changed the shape of what she understood about herself. Want to ask you something, Loretta said. Okay, and I want an honest answer, not the answer you think I want. Marisol turned to look at her directly. All right, I want you to run this property, Loretta said. General manager, the decision is made. It's not a question, but I want to know how you feel about it before talk about what it means. Her soul was quiet for a long moment, not performing consideration, actually sitting with it. Loretta could see the work happening in real time, the way you see it in a face that isn't hiding anything. Terrified, Marisol said finally, and I think I need to tell you why, not as a way of saying no. Because I think you should know what you're actually getting. Go ahead. I stayed quiet for too long, Marisol said. I filed 3 complaints and then filed them in the back of my mind because getting them marked resolved felt like a closed door, and I told myself there was nothing else I could do. Maybe that was partially true. The system was built to bury them, but partially I was protecting myself. And I need to be honest about that part. Loretta looked at her steadily. Okay, I watched people come through this lobby for 5 years. I saw what happened. Not all of it, I didn't see everything, but enough. And there were days I could have said something to a guest that would have helped, and I didn't because I was calculating the cost, and the cost felt too high. Then today the cost of staying quiet was higher, Marisol said simply. That's what changed. Not me, exactly. The math. Loretta was quiet for a moment. You know what I've spent 30 years looking for? In every property, every manager I've hired and trained and watched and sometimes had to let go of. Someone who can tell me an honest thing about themselves, Loretta said, without being asked twice, without dressing it up. Here is the truth about what I did and why I did it and what I'm responsible for. Looked at Marisol directly. Do you understand how rare that is in this industry and most industries? I'm not sure it's rare, Marisol said. I think people know they're honest things. They just usually don't say them, which is exactly the problem. Loretta's voice carried something in it, not quite warmth, not quite sadness, something that belonged to both. Runs 63 hotels. I have had managers with 20 years of experience and perfect operational records who could not do what you just did. To not sit with someone who had the authority to fire them and say, here is the part that was my fault. Where I short. Miss Daxel looked up. I'm 31, she said. I don't know how to run a hotel. You know this one, Loretta said. You've watched it for 5 years from a position that sees everything, the desk, the guests, the staff, the cracks. Concierge work is the most informative job in any property if you're paying attention. And you've been paying attention. I'll make mistakes. Yes, you will. And when you do, I need you to tell me about them the same way you just told me about the last 5 years. Straight, without dressing it up. Marisol looked at her for a long moment. What if I'm not ready? You're not, Loretta said. Nobody is ready the first time they do something that matters. Ready is what you become by doing it. A silence. There's one more thing, Marisol said. Tell me, the 3 complaints I filed, the ones that got marked, resolved. I need to know who those guests were. I need to know if there's any way to. We're already pulling the records, Loretta said. All 41. We're going to contact every one of them. And if the guests from your 3 complaints want to speak to someone at this property directly, that person can be you, if you're willing. Marisol was quiet for a moment. I'm willing. Good. Loretta held out her hand. Marisol shook it. And in the gesture, simple, direct, the most ordinary of professional agreements, something completed that had been trying to complete itself since 9:47 that morning. The phone call happened at 8:47 in the evening. Marisol was sitting on the floor of her apartment with her back against the couch, the particular position of someone who made it home and then ran out of the energy required to choose a more deliberate location. Her shoes were by the door. The television was off. The city outside the window was doing what cities do at 8:47 on a Tuesday, which is continue regardless. She called her mother. Her mother picked up on the second ring because her mother always picked up on the second ring when Marisol called on a weeknight, which happened rarely enough that a weeknight call was its own signal. What happened? And Marisol told her all of it. The morning, Gerald and the card and the safe. Loretta arriving in a navy coat with a canvas bag that nobody looked at twice. The intercom announcement and the phones going up and Frank's live stream and the emails and Howard and the leather folder and Patricia Dunn walking past Gerald to check on Loretta instead of the other way around. She told her about stepping away from the concierge desk, about saying don't touch her with her hands pressed flat against her sides and her heart going at a speed she was fairly certain wasn't medically recommended. Loretta's nod, small, direct, the nod that meant I see you, and what it had cost and what it had been worth. Her mother listened without interrupting. This was unusual. Her mother was not a woman who listened to long stories without contributing. opinions and she expressed them, which was one of the things Marisol had always loved about her and also occasionally found exhausting. When Marisol finished, there was a silence on the line that felt different from the pauses between sentences. "Mom, I'm here." Another silence, the kind that's something excited. "Marisol, I need to tell you something." "Okay." "When you were in your second year of college. You remember I was working housekeeping in Seattle." Marisol remembered. Her mother had taken the job when her father's hours were cut. Had worked it for almost a year without complaining, which was how Marisol had known it was harder than her mother was saying. "I remember. There was a hotel I worked at for 9 months. Downtown, good hotel, nice building, the kind of place that would have been a treat to stay in." Her mother paused. "They didn't let us use the main elevator during peak hours, not when we were carrying linens or equipment. But not when we were going on break either. Not when we were just moving through the building as human beings. It was a service elevator. That's where we went." Marisol went very still. "They had a policy," her mother continued. "The main elevator was for guests and management. We were told it was about the guest experience, not wanting housekeeping staff visible in the main areas during peak times." "Which hotel?" A silence that lasted longer than the others. "Ellison Grand," her mother said. 2013. Marisol sat on her apartment floor and did not say anything for a moment. Her mother, in this building, in 2013, 2 years after Loretta signed the papers at the folding table, using the service elevator. Because she was carrying something. Because the main elevator wasn't where people like her were supposed to be seen. "You never told me," Marisol said. "You were 20 years old, starting your life. I didn't want you carrying my old weight." "Old? No," her mother said. "I know that now. But then I just wanted you to go forward without looking back at what I was walking through." Marisol pressed her palm flat against the floor, the particular grounding of cold hardwood when everything else is moving. "Why are you telling me now?" Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Because you told me what you did today," she said. "And because I think it means something different now. What happened to me in that building and what you did in that building today, I think those things belong to each other. I think you should know that." Marisol thought about Loretta, 45 years old, sitting at a folding table in an empty lobby, signing papers with hands that wouldn't hold still. The guests whose complaints had been filed and forgotten. Eleanor Voss and her husband in the lobby chairs. Bernard and his son's reservation that couldn't be found. The woman near the elevator who'd been spoken to dismissively and gotten a form letter that said shared with the team. In a service elevator, going on break, about all of it existing in the same building, in the same walls, across different years, accumulating in the way things accumulate when nobody is made to account for them. "Going to hold the front door open," Marisol said. "Every morning, that's—" She stopped. Tried again. "That's the only thing I know how to say right now. I'm going to be in that building, and the door is going to be open, and it's going to stay open." Her mother was quiet. "Then your grandmother would say you got that from me." "She'd be right," Marisol said. And somewhere in there, both of them cried. The kind of crying that is not about sadness exactly, or not only about sadness, but about things shifting into positions that are more true than the positions they were in before. Which hurts and is better, both at once. In the lobby of the Ellison Grand Hotel, the evening light had gone the deep gold. That happened when the sun caught the marble bill at exactly the angle Loretta had designed for in 2010. Okafor was still there. He had nowhere particular to be. His wife was visiting her sister in Portland. His flight home wasn't until morning, and the lobby strangely felt like the right place to be tonight. Like something unfinished that he wanted to see to its proper end. He was on his second cup of coffee, which his doctor had opinions about, when Loretta came back from Howard's conference room and sat down across from him. Not in the corner chair, at one of the lobby tables, the position of two people having a conversation rather than the position of one person making a statement. Frank set his cup down, looked at her. 31 years, he said. I covered City Hall corruption, 2 governors' races, a bridge collapse, and a pharmaceutical fraud case that took 4 years to get to trial. Loretta waited. This is the most important thing I've filmed all year, he said, and I filmed it on my phone while waiting for my wife to check in. Your wife, Loretta said. Is she still waiting to check in? Frank blinked, then laughed, a short, genuine sound of a man who had completely forgotten about the practical circumstances that had brought him here. I should probably. Claudine is arranging complimentary accommodation for every guest who witnessed this morning, Loretta said. Your wife's room is covered. Both staying as long as you'd like. Frank settled back in his chair. Then I'm not in a hurry. So for a moment, the lobby around them, quieter now, the day's urgency faded into the gentler energy of a hotel at 7 in the evening. "Can I ask you something?" Frank said. "Sure. 30 years ago, not exactly, but roughly, I was a young reporter in Memphis. My first year out of journalism school. My editor kept sending me to stories he thought were small because he was keeping the bigger assignments for himself. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. He sent me to cover a woman who'd bought a failing motel outside Memphis. Old building, needed work. She'd barely scraped together enough to make the purchase. He thought it was a human interest piece. Local color. Loretta looked at him. It wasn't small, Frank said. She was the most certain person I'd ever interviewed. Arrogant. Just, she had done the math, and the math said she was capable of this, and she had decided to believe the math. Did she tell you? Frank looked at his cup. She said, "I just want my kids to be able to walk through the front door without being asked where they're going." The lobby was very quiet. "Did she get that?" Loretta asked. "I don't know. I tried to find her for a follow-up 2 years later. Couldn't track her down. The motel had changed hands. No forwarding contact." He looked up. "I've thought about her occasionally over the years." Wondered. Loretta looked at the lobby. At the windows, dark now, the city lights beginning to matter in the way they only matter at night. The plants that were real because she'd specified it. At the floor she'd argued about and won. "Then I hope," she said, "that somebody made sure she got it." Frank nodded slowly. "You're going to keep building, aren't you?" "Yes. Even after today. Even after finding out it goes back further than you knew." "Especially after," she said, "because stopping now would mean I got to the hard part and sat down, and that's not something I'm willing to do." Frank looked at her for a long moment. "Can I quote you on that?" "You can," she said. "But only if you quote the whole conversation, not just the part that sounds like a bumper sticker." Frank smiled. The full smile of a 62-year-old man who has spent a career knowing the difference between a quote and a truth. "Deal." He picked up his cup. They sat together in the quiet of the lobby, the reporter who had witnessed it and the woman it had happened to, and neither of them felt the need to fill the quiet with anything. Outside, Seattle was doing what it always did at this hour, moving, continuing, the ordinary motion of a city that would read about this tomorrow and form opinions and have conversations and move on to the next thing, as cities do. Inside, the lobby of the Ellison Grand Hotel held the specific stillness of a place that had been through something and was deciding, in the way that only places can, what it was going to be next. The morning came the way October mornings come in Seattle, gray clouds and gold light underneath them, the particular combination that looks cold from inside and turns out to be bearable the moment you step into it. Marisol Vega arrived at 6:58. She stood on the sidewalk outside the Ellison Grand for a moment before going in. Performing hesitation, actually standing there in the October morning, letting the building be what it was, letting herself be what she was about to become. She had her mother's voice in her ear from the night before. "The front door wasn't for people like us." And she had Loretta's voice. "The door is yours to keep open, both true, both hers to carry." She pushed through the revolving door. The lobby in the early morning was different from the lobby any other time. Emptier, quieter. The chandeliers on their overnight setting, lower, warmer. Marble floor catching the first of the gray morning light, coming through the tall windows, the plants casting long shadows. Looked, Marisol thought, like a beginning, which was exactly what it was. She was standing at the front boss deck, learning the new management system, which had considerably more layers than the concierge interface she'd spent 5 years inside, when Loretta came through the revolving door at 7:41. Navy coat, canvas bag, flat shoes. She stopped beside Marisol, looked at the lobby for a moment, the way she always seemed to look at it. Not casually, but with the attention of someone who built it and knows every decision that went into it. "How did you stop?" she asked. "About 4 hours," Marisol said. "But they were good hours. Good hours are worth more than long ones." They stood together for a moment, the lobby around them getting ready for its day, the morning desk staff arriving, the first sounds of the kitchen somewhere below, the city side, the windows, going from quiet to beginning. "I called my mother last night," Marisol said. Loretta waited. "She worked housekeeping here in 2013, 9 months. They made the staff use the service elevator. Just when they were carrying things, all the time, during breaks, when they were just moving through the building." Loretta was still for a moment. "I didn't know," she said, not as a defense, as a fact that was going to require her to do something. Should have known. That's part of what today is about. Building the systems that make sure I know. Make sure the people with the least power in any building I own have somewhere to go when something is wrong. She never said anything. She didn't think anyone would listen. I know. Loretta's voice was quiet. That's the failure I'm most responsible for. Gerald, not Benton. The fact that the people closest to what was happening had no reason to believe that telling the truth would produce anything other than consequences for themselves. Marisol looked at her. You're going to fix that. I'm going to try to fix it, Loretta said. Which is a different thing, and I think it's important to say so. They stood in the lobby that belonged to both of them now, in different ways, with different stakes, across a 27-year difference in age, and a very different relationship to what this building had meant and cost. You nervous? Loretta asked. Completely, Marisol said. Good, Loretta said. Means you understand what it is. Loretta picked up her bag. The flight back to Memphis was at 11. There were 62 other hotels. There were 112 complaints to follow up on, and 3 other properties to assess, and an 18-month legal process, and a company to reform from a level that was going to require more sustained attention than any single Tuesday could contain. James would have said, you don't have to do it all today, and she would have said, I know, I just have to start today. He would have squeezed her hand and said, then you'd better get going. She started toward the door. Miss Simmons. She stopped, turned. Marisol was standing at the front desk beside it, not behind it, with her hands resting on the surface and her eyes clear. Thank you, she said, for not walking away yesterday morning. Loretta looked at her for a moment. I walked away too many times, she said. I'm finished with that. She pushed through the revolving door. The October morning reached her, gray and gold, cold in the way she'd expected and fine in the way she'd also expected. The sidewalk, the city, the ordinary motion of things continuing. She had a car waiting. She had a company to rebuild. 62 other hotels and 112 names, and an 18-month road ahead of her that she would walk the same way she'd walked every road worth walking, one day at a time, with clear eyes, and with James Simmons somewhere in the back of her mind saying, they should be afraid of what you'd become. She had become it. She was still becoming it, and the door she had walked through was, from this morning forward, held open by someone who understood exactly what it had cost to build it. Was enough. That was, in fact, everything.